happy to have every single one of you in this space this evening. And I would like to begin with a short story. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States of, I think, 60, 70 years ago, one day called one of the associate justice from the Supreme Court in America. And when he called this guy, his wife said he's in his reading program at the moment, but he would still make time for you. And the president visited him, and when he was having a conversation with him, he asked him a question. He said, you know, Justice Holmes, why are you so serious with this reading business? And he responded by saying, I know of no other way to improve my mind. I know of no other way to improve my mind. And I think that sets the tone for why we are here this evening and why we're having this conversation in this space. I think this is one of Ambassador's favorite spaces, being surrounded by books, being surrounded by wisdom. As you know, Justice Holmes responded, I know no other way to improve my mind. So today, we'll be having a conversation that spans a number of things, including reading, the reading culture, change management, leadership, and the backdrop of this conversation would be his experience. So I would like to begin by introducing him. I'm sure he is no stranger to anyone in this room, and even those who are streaming online, but I would still love to introduce him. So he is an African giant. I think if you know anything remotely about his career and his resume, you know that he's played a pivotal role in the development of our continent, and more specifically, our country. And he served as the Chief Secretary of the President of the United Republic of Tanzania between 2011 to 2016. And prior to that, he was an excellent diplomat. His postings included Permanent Representative of Tanzania to the United Nations from 2010 to 2011, Ambassador to the United States of America in Washington, D.C. from 2007 to 2010, High Commissioner to Canada 2005 to 2007, and counselor in the Embassy of Tanzania in Stockholm, Sweden in 1987 to 1992. But he's someone who also worked very closely with two presidents. Between 1993 and 2005, he worked as a speechwriter and personal assistant to two presidents of Tanzania, President Ali Hassan Mwinyi from 1993 to 1995, and President Benjamin William Mkapa, the late president, from 1995 to 2005. And by the way, this is an abbreviated version of his resume. If I was going to cover everything, we would be here a while. And beyond all of this, he is someone who is very passionate about reading and about writing. And currently, he serves as the board chair for UONGOZI Leadership Institute. And yeah, so today, the session that we're about to have, we hope it will be very interactive. We will be talking. We'll create space for people to engage and ask questions. So yeah, with that being said and done, I would like to welcome Ambassador Ombeni Sefue. Karibu. Now, we've had a conversation, and I think one thing that came up in our conversation was this excuse that a lot of leaders make when it comes to reading. We know that leadership comes with responsibility. Your time becomes time is a finite resource, but when you become a leader with a lot of responsibilities, your time is even more limited. And so if you ask a lot of leaders who don't read books, the top excuse is that I don't have time. Yet you told me, and I'm sure you would tell our audience here that you work closely with some of the busiest people in the world, and they found time to read. And you yourself have been very busy in your career, in your life, yet you always found time to read. So my question is, for someone who is extremely busy, and they use that as an excuse to say that I'm not really necessarily reading, what do you have to say about that? And also, how did you manage to always find time or make time to invest in reading throughout your career?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ben. Let me first say how pleased I am to be surrounded by books and people who love books. I'm sure I'm going to talk to the converted. But I'm sure even all the people that are following us virtually, I hope they will find value in what we are going to discuss here today. And I really want to talk about the culture of reading as an essential component of leadership. Because we're a leadership institution, the government has mandated us to build the capacity of our leaders. So for us, getting leaders to read is extremely important. And reading not only as something you need to know because you have to do a certain job, but to know and to open up your mind. To open up your mind. I had a discussion with somebody and they were looking for books about, I told them, do you also read fiction? I said, no, why should I read fiction? I say, fiction is a mirror of society. You learn a lot by reading fiction as well. So good reading is not just reading what you need to know for the kind of job you do, but it really distinguishes you from somebody who knows and somebody who knows well. And reading builds your culture, who you are as a person. So I'm very passionate about that. So you say, people say they don't have time to read. It's an excuse people use, but it's not true. If you find time to eat, you can find time to read. If you think reading is as important as eating food, you will find time to do so. And you rightly say that, who can be more busy than a president? But I can tell you that the years I worked with President Mkapa really showed me how much he loves books. He loves writing, but he loves reading books. And don't think that he's only reading about politics. He was reading biographies, he was reading poetry, he was reading fiction, he was reading all kinds of books. So you talk to him, you know that he has a huge breadth of knowledge about all kinds of things. And so you can imagine the challenge I had as his speechwriter. What do you think? If I don't read, I become useless to him. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have worked with somebody like him. And I really would like to encourage people to read and not to use being busy as an excuse. No. Yeah.
I like that, and I think you are definitely fortunate to be in a position where you're surrounded or you work very closely with someone who has that breadth of knowledge and their taste for books is very diverse. Now you mentioned something, right, where you had to read to remain useful. And I know that's a motivation that a lot of people have when it comes to reading, where you read as a function of being useful in what you are doing. But at the same time, if that is the only motivation that one has, then your taste is also very limited, which means if you're working in oil and gas, you'll probably only read about oil and gas. If you work in politics, you'll probably read a lot around political science or maybe the economy and other things. So what beyond being useful in your job, what other motivation do you have that has really always fueled you to make time to read?
I think you have to go back to where I came from. I think the greatest inspiration was my mother, my late mother. I will say it here today. My mother was the first female teacher in Tanzania.
Wow.
And I have the certificate from the colonial government to prove it. So, and I'm the last born in the family. So she had retired. So I had the teacher to myself. So by the time during our time, those my age will remember, sometimes you begin school when you are 10, and you have to put your hand like this to see if you can touch the other. So I wasn't quite there. I was, I think, 6 or so. But my mother said, no, I'll just take you to the teacher. And he took me, and I was the little one, and he says, oh, you stand on top of the table. And the teacher saw me and said, oh, you look smart. What's your name? So I began studying very early, and my mother made sure that I was the best. And you have to read to be the best. So I grew up in that environment. I went to school, secondary school, read all kinds of books, any books I could find when I was in secondary school. Then I went to high school and on and on and on. So some people, when they ask me, say, where did you learn speech writing? You were a speech writer to Mwinyi for 3 years, speech writer to Mkapa, of all the people, for 10 years. Where did you learn this? I said, I didn't study anywhere about speech writing. No. But the only explanation is, I think, it's all the kinds of books I read in my life. It gives me a certain understanding perspective that enables me to explain things, to build cases or develop an argument about almost anything. So I didn't know it. I mean, I joined the Foreign Service, and at that time also the Foreign Service encouraged people to write and to think. I'm not sure if they're still doing it today. But really, you read, you write, and you are appreciated for what you do. Sometimes what you write goes all the way to the president. And sometimes the president asks, oh, who originated this? And that time they would say, it's so and so. So I think that's what made people, eventually president, to think that I can be a speechwriter. I didn't know why they picked me. I was in our embassy in Stockholm, and I was told, oh, President Mwinyi wants a speechwriter, you go back home. I said, why me? But it seems that as I was writing all kinds of things, there are people who notice that this guy can write. And why can I write? Because I read a lot. I know a lot of things because of all the readings that I've done. So that's what really made me who I am. I didn't start reading when I was with Mkapa. No. It's a culture I had. That's why I like the word culture. And it came all the way from my childhood. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a reminder to all the parents in the room, all grandparents, and those who are watching as well, in terms of like the importance of making sure that you create a culture and space, even at the level of a family, where you spark and build that curiosity. Yeah. Now, I will ask a question, but I think for those of you who maybe have questions that you prefer to ask, this would be the time. So the goal is to make this very interactive. So I'll ask, and then we'll create a space for you guys to ask questions, and then we'll continue the conversation. Now, there's a quote. I know a book that you said you didn't finish reading, but you read half of it or so. The Prince. Maybe some of you guys have read it.
Machiavelli.
And in it, there's a quote that says, a wise man, and I think we can excuse him, he only uses the word man throughout this. So I guess at the time, the conversation around gender diversity was not necessarily. A wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men, and to imitate those who have been supreme, so that if his ability does not equal theirs, at least it will savor of it. And in your leadership journey, you've encountered a number of people, you've worked in different continents, in different roles. I would like to believe that you've met a number of people who are worthy of imitation. And maybe they even played a great role in your own development because you saw things in them that you imitated, and eventually they become a part of your culture and yourself. Yeah. So if that's the case, would you share with us maybe a few stories of some of those encounters and some of those things that you adopted in your own life?
Yeah, as I said, what I am today is a product of a lot of people. Certainly my parents, my teachers. But in my career, I don't know if I can single out one person. Because I worked with very many people. But at the level of the years I was at the State House, for instance, you know, I learned a lot from President Mwinyi. I'll tell you one story. You know, here I was from Stockholm, you know, and during those times we were working largely in English, you know, and I come here with a leading expert of Kiswahili and I have to write speeches for him. And first I was a bit nervous, and the guy who was doing the job was Ambassador Andrew Raja. I don't know if some of you used to know him. And I think he had stayed with him for about 6 years or so, and he wanted to go back to the Foreign Service. That's where they picked me from Stockholm to come and take over his position. So I talked to him. I said, what does it take to do this job? I said, oh, you just do it. You know, there is no manual. You are his personal assistant and speechwriter. You know, you will know what he wants. So I write my first draft speech, and it comes back, you know, corrected, not the substance, the language, the Kiswahili, you know. It went, it came back. I do it again, it goes, it came back. You know, after a while, the secretary tells me, oh, the president is calling you. Oh, what is this now? So I go in, he says, I mean, those who know him, you know, he said, lovely. He says, have a seat, he says. He says, I see you have a problem with Kiswahili. I said, I try. And he told me, he said, you know what your problem is? You are a very good writer. The problem is you think in English and you write in Kiswahili. If I'm going to make a speech in English, by all means, think in English, draft the speech in English. If I'm going to speak in Kiswahili, think in Kiswahili. Don't think in English and then translate it. That's why you run into trouble. I've learned that lesson, and after that, it came back clean. That's why I say, you know, then I work with President Mkapa. Of course, he was also very good with Kiswahili, definitely, but also very, very good with English. And that was a challenge because he learned English all the way to university. I stopped learning English in Form 4 as a subject. I mean, English, with Mkapa now, with English. But fortunately, as I said, because I read a lot of books in my life, so my English seemed very acceptable to him. I didn't have a lot of problems. And all I can say is that the years I spent with him, I think they really strengthened whatever capabilities I had. And I don't even know the words to say of the gratitude I feel for that opportunity to have worked with both of them. Mm. Yeah.
Now, if I was to turn to the audience, are there any questions in the room? So we have a hand in the back. Karibu.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to speak. I will speak in Kiswahili. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ombeni Sefue, for the good, introduction of the discussion, of the topic of the discussion. My name is Simona Saidi, and when I heard that we are going to talk about this topic about culture of reading and leadership, I really wanted to be here so that I can ask you several questions. And I'm glad in your discussions you have just briefly talked about it, because I wanted to ask you that reading, it's culture. Now, if you are to consider about the situation in Tanzania, we have the issue of language. And indeed, as we know, language is very important when you're talking about reading. In Tanzania, we have Kiswahili and English. For you, you are lucky. Until Form 4, you said you were taught, you were studying in English. Some of us we were taught in Kiswahili. But if we reach some stage, we are compelled to speak, write, and understanding English. And that's, for me, it's a big dilemma as far as the nation is concerned. Now, what views do you have? What can you tell? Okay, what can you suggest? Because this one is big, for me, it's a big problem. Even if we go outside beyond the borders here, we're supposed to talk in English. But here, we're told to read and understand books in Kiswahili. So what is what? I mean, what do you recommend? What do you have to say? Because this is very serious, and I'm confused right now.
Thank you very much. First, let me clarify. During our time, the medium of instruction was English all the way. Even in primary school, we were learning Kiswahili, but really, to a large extent, the medium of instruction was still English. After I think grade 3 or 4, yeah. So it was like that. But coming to your question, I really don't know what's the problem with us here in Tanzania. Maybe Brother Walter, you will help me. What's so difficult about learning 2 languages? What's so difficult? Because I get the impression that people ask, or is it English or is it Kiswahili? And I say both. Both. I have no problem in communicating in Kiswahili. I have no problem in communicating in English. If I can do it, why can't anybody else do it? I'll give you an example. In this world, you meet all kinds of people, and it's a globalized world. You meet all kinds of people. Of course, as diplomats, we are encouraged to learn other languages, and I'll give you my own example. As a young diplomat, I tried to learn German. German was too tough for me. I left it halfway. And then when I was at the Center for Foreign Relations, I chose Spanish and French. I took French a bit seriously. Spanish, I didn't take it so seriously, just enough to get my credits and pass. Then fast forward many years later, I find myself, because during those days we didn't have an embassy in Cuba. So the High Commissioner in Canada, Ambassador in Canada, those who don't know, if you're in a Commonwealth country, you are called High Commissioner. So in Canada, I was called High Commissioner. But I was accredited to Cuba. And I go to Cuba now. And I try to remember the little Spanish I learned. I had forgotten. And I wished at that time that I had taken Spanish more seriously. Of course, I mix with Cubans slowly, a few words come back. But the value of knowing more than one language, certainly no more than 2 languages. So I don't see why it should be difficult for Tanzanians to be fluent in very good Kiswahili and very good English. I almost added French on top of that. Go to Europe. Go to the Nordic countries, go to Germany, they use their languages as a medium of instruction, but you meet them anywhere in the world, they speak as good English as anyone else. So I would encourage young Tanzanians not to think of in terms of either or. I say do both and do very well. It's possible.
This is a very difficult discussion. But there's something which troubles me enormously. That it seems only Africans who think of other languages as their primary language of intellectual work.
Yeah.
Only continent. Small little Lithuania, they use their language. It's the language of intellectual work. Now I'm moving away from simply language. talk about intellectual work. But all African countries, without exception, no, I'm leaving out the Arab African world. And I don't like this black Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, but let's just, for the sake of argument, use that.
Yeah.
We are the only people who don't think about languages as languages to carry on intellectual work. For me, that's the fundamental. If you do not have your language as the basic language in which you do everything, your language, you can't really even learn properly a second or third or fourth language, because your mother tongue is the reference point for learning other languages. Okay. Now here, we suppress our mother tongue, and Tanzania in particular, we've got a serious problem that actually goes against international practice. We discourage other languages other than Swahili and English. Now I find it very, very difficult, because I speak about 4 or 5 languages in the Kagera region.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm very happy about that. And it's enormously interesting when I can find some work in Ikihaya that brings me more meaning than even in my own language, Ikihangaza, or Swahili or English. This enriches everything. So I think we need to go back and say, why don't we prize our own languages as the basic medium in which we communicate everything? And in this particular age, intellectual scientific work. If we can deal with that question, all others can be dealt with.
There's a question from our online audience, so I will proceed to ask that question. In your job as a speechwriter, what was the most difficult speech you ever came across to write? And how did you make it through? This is a question from one audience member called Raymond Maro.
I'm not sure if there is one, but I can tell you, certainly one of the most difficult was at the funeral of Mwalimu Nyerere. The circumstances of that event. And here I have to draft a speech for the president, sitting president, at the funeral of Mwalimu Nyerere. And you know, for instance, the relationship between President Mkapa and Mwalimu. It was a very, very strong relationship. So putting myself in his position, because that's essentially what speech writing is about, is that it's not your speech. So don't start writing as you. You put yourself in his or her position. So in this case, I had to put myself in President Mkapa's shoes. I say, if I am President Mkapa, what should I say at this funeral? So it exercised me a lot, yeah. But fortunately, I think those who were there, they saw that it came out quite well, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think for those who would be interested, there's a session happening tomorrow, I think around 4 p.m., around publishing in Tanzania. Because when you think about languages and culture and you know, one's language being the primary really medium of communicating intellectual thoughts, I think there'll be a lot of space to discuss that tomorrow. So if you're interested at 4 p.m., same place, there'll be that discussion happening. But I think language and culture, that's a very rich discussion. How do you separate? How do you just view a language as language, and how do you view one language really as something that has, you know, the ethos of your culture in it? I think, yeah, if we have time, we'll continue to explore some of those things.
I may add to what Brother Walter said. I always have an issue with Bakita people. That sometimes when they can't find the right word in Kiswahili, they coin another one from a foreign language. And I don't think that's right. I don't believe that out of the over 100 and I don't know, 24, 25 tribes in this country, we can't find a word that we can use for an English word or whatever until we have to borrow from a foreign country. And those who were there, you remember Mwalimu used to do that. A word like kungatuka, I think. He just coined it from, yeah, from Kizanaki. He said, this is what it means. So I think we could do more about that. Yeah, but as you say, I mean, tomorrow, Brother Walter has another session here about publishing. I mean, this debate should continue. Yeah.
Now, going back to, I think, the introduction that I gave at the very beginning, where I said that your experience, you worked quite closely with two presidents as a personal assistant and speechwriter, but you also served in the previous administration as well. And so you've seen a number of changes happen in the country. But I think the more drastic one was between President Mwinyi's administration and the late President Mkapa. But yet you remained useful throughout. And I think this is quite relevant because we live in a world today where there are unprecedented changes happening, whether it's technology, whether it's geopolitics, and changes happen very fast. And leaders are called to adapt very quickly and to remain useful. Otherwise, the world leaves you behind. And we have a number of examples of companies that have been left behind by changes that they refused to adapt to. So what are some of the things that leaders can do to continue to remain relevant and useful as all these big changes are happening either in their particular context or in the larger world, but it's affecting where they are?
Yeah, to be relevant, you have to continue developing your capacity to be relevant, and reading plays a central role in that. And you ask me how I was found useful with President Mwinyi, and then with Mkapa for 10 years. And then I came back again and worked with President Kikwete, with President Magufuli. So it's who you are. And I think it all boils down to reading, knowing things, and relating them to different circumstances. There are a lot of changes within the country. There are a lot of changes within the region. There are a lot of changes globally. To be relevant, you have to continue knowing what's happening, what's coming. If you're a leader and you don't know where the world is going, I feel sorry for your country. And you can only know by reading. And if you are the leader, you can't just wait for your staff to read for you. It's putting too much faith in them. You must be able to say, yeah, what they are writing, I think makes sense. But you should also be able to say, no, I don't think this is, because I read so-and-so, I read so-and-so. So reading keeps you relevant. As you say, I worked with the president during a period of huge transition. Mwalimu built the foundation of this country. He built the foundation of this country. He did a lot of things. Everybody knows what he did. Phenomena. And we are extremely fortunate to have him. But when President Mwinyi came, the economy was not doing well at all. So he came with Ruksa, opening up the economy. So if you are his speechwriter, you are helping to put words into the ideas that he has for the kinds of reforms. You must know what reforms you are talking about and how it has been done in other countries. And you can only do that by reading. That's what makes you relevant to the kind of issues that this president is dealing with. At the time he was leaving, there was a lot of issues, as you heard himself saying, okay, I opened the house, but the windows because the air was stuffy, but in came the mosquitoes and the flies. So the next administration has to deal with the mosquitoes and the flies, which is what President Mkapa had to deal with. You know? So the fact that I read a lot about these things in other countries, it can help me to draft the kind of statements that the President Mkapa can make to explain what he's trying to do. Creating the systems, creating the institutions. You can only do that if you have read, if you know. Otherwise, if you don't know, you are irrelevant to a president. No president would want to be surrounded by somebody who doesn't know. So I continue to be relevant, and I think it's because I spent a lot of time reading. Yeah.
So it goes back to reading, and I think
it's all about reading. It's all about reading.
I think there's a quote that I personally love that says, all leaders are readers, but not necessarily all readers are leaders.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think the context there is leadership in the sense of influence.
Yeah.
But I think if we speak of positional leadership, there are people who are sitting in positions that don't necessarily read, and which is unfortunate, because if people are given the responsibility and the duty to make decisions that could be affecting hundreds, thousands, and for others, millions of people, that's quite unfortunate.
Yeah.
Now, leadership is a universal function. It's something that we all share at different, whether you're a parent, whether you're a friend, especially if we look at leadership as the ability to influence other people to take action. It's something that all human beings share. Yet, the context that you're in can define the type of leadership, meaning that when you're a parent at home, it's going to look very different than when you're in the workplace, and it's going to look very different if you are a president of a country. So, you have worked in many leadership contexts. What are some challenges that are universal? Because we know that the challenges that the president is facing will be very different from the challenges that a teacher would be facing in a classroom, or a parent, or let's say a junior manager in an institution. But there are challenges that are universal, meaning that it doesn't matter what level of leadership you're in, you will experience these challenges. And so what are some of the challenges that, as you went through and operated and worked in different contexts, those challenges were always there, and how did you overcome those challenges?
The challenge that quickly comes to my mind is, if you are a leader, you have to lead. And to lead is to show the way. So you must know the way. Because if you don't know the way, you will get lost, and all who follow you will get lost. And I think reading is the best way to broaden your vision of your society, of the world. And then you can position yourself that in this region, in this continent, in this world, what is my position? Where do I want to go? How do I get there? And you can do that by reading. So if you're a leader and you don't know, then you don't know, and you lead your people into the wilderness. Yeah. So to me, that's extremely important. Yeah.
Now we have questions from our online audience that they would love to know, and I think a number of questions really people are asking. What are some of your favorite books? If you could share maybe one or two titles of books that you consider your favorite books. And more specifically, I think after you've answered that, there's a question of someone who says, how do you develop a passion in subjects that you don't have interest in? But you have to read them as part of your duties.
Yeah.
And how do you remain authentic in that? And I think you're the perfect person to respond to this. You probably had to. And this comes from Felicia Masaki.
Yeah. Now, I don't think I can give you one book, because I've read so many books. But I can tell you the kind of books that I like to read. There was time where I was reading a lot of fiction, no doubt. But eventually, especially as I began working with presidents, I liked reading autobiographies, memoirs of leaders from the Americans, Europe, Asia. So I developed a habit of reading those. I also enjoyed reading books about globalization. You know, the years I worked with President Mkapa on globalization, really giving you a perspective of where the world is going, what is driving what, how the different interests of countries play, and if you like, how Africa is being shortchanged. So I've been very passionate about that. History, yes, and I was just asking George here if we have the book by Adam Holschild, King Leopold's Ghost. Or there's another one, The Heart of Darkness. I think, brother, you know it. So if you really want to know why DRC is where it is today, read those books. That's what I just told him. We don't even say, no, you find it. Because our people have to know. You know, we have people here who believe this, that somehow Africans, look, if you read those books, see what these people did to Africa. And that legacy remains until today. And like the DRC, they want to keep it that way, so that they do exactly what King Leopold did. So I think our young people should read more also about history. I'm sure there are a lot of young people who don't even know our own history as Tanzania.
Especially our history.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't know. You know? And that's why as UONGOZI Institute, we have a passion about getting our president to write their biographies. Let's have an authoritative book about a certain period of our country. Because otherwise, you know, and you look, I mean, Brother Walter is in publishing, a lot of books about Africa are written by non-Africans. Yeah. So even our own people, not just reading, but also writing books. So this is extremely, extremely important. Yeah.
Ambassador, it sounds like you have something that you would like to add to the discussion. Karibu sana.
For this discussion, it's very, very useful. I was looking at the culture bit, and of course that's how you started, Ambassador, about learning when you were very, very young. And I think that's what we're missing here, and I think as you have this project for doing the biographies for presidents, maybe UONGOZI Institute should also look into trying to develop this culture in the very young. Ambassador Betha and myself, we were sometimes back, and we have not developed this project further, but we were doing it under the Hassan Mahaja Trust, where we would build reading corners in primary schools, especially in classrooms, in the grade 1 and grade 2 classrooms, so that we have very low placed shelves for books, and we would stack books there. And we'll get volunteers go there, try to read stories to the kids and to train them to read. And I think that's what is missing. I get very scared when I go through Twitter accounts and I read what our young people are writing. When he cannot make an argument, anatukana tu. So you find that he is completely frustrated. He cannot make an argument. So what he does is he starts insulting and swearing and calling names. And that's a big challenge that we have. If we don't try to help our young to read and to understand, and even the very, very, those who are already have graduated, they cannot make an argument. And this is a huge challenge. What you saw about the law school, it's not an accident. It just tells a long story of where we are coming from. This culture is completely absent. And we don't have only one person to point a finger to. Parents, teachers, systemic, the education system itself. Parents do not have time for their children anymore. Some don't even read books to them or the Bible, or even let them do the madrasa and learn with them. So this is a big, big cultural problem that we have. And this generation, our generation, owes it to our children and grandchildren to try to do something while we're still alive. I know people like my brother here, they've done a lot with the publishing that he has. Some of the books that made us who we are, Alf Lela Ulela, 1,000 Days, Alf Lela Ulela, Ausiku Alfu Namoja. You tell this story to young people, then they don't understand. They don't know. And the stories in that book are stories that teach people things which they ought to get to know. But all these things we don't have. There was this English books, which maybe you may want to republish again for us in primary school. You would have a trip from Kampala to the equator. If those people of my age would remember. And this fellow is traveling all the way to Dar es Salaam with his family and his dog. And you're learning in English also geography of your country. And we abolished these books. We are not replacing them with any useful books, and this is the biggest challenge we have. So when you talk of reading culture, it's a culture that has to be nurtured. For Balozi, he just gave testimony. He didn't drop by, came from his mother, who was a teacher, and then it developed over the years. Now, I don't know exactly what we can do, but in small ways, like the reading corners we try to establish, I think it's something that we need to start doing very fast. But not only that, our schools, the public schools are in dire need of books, in dire need of facilities, just simple facilities. And I think we need to do more as a generation, not only pointing a finger at government, but I think we need ourselves as a generation that has benefited from better education to try to give it back. This is what I think. We can have a discussion about, or even feel bad about what is happening. If we don't do anything, itakuwa shida too. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just add to what Ambassador Maja said. And this is what I mean by reading culture. It has to be part of you, part of a family. Experts tell us that what children become is like 80% what the parents are. It doesn't matter what you teach the children. Don't do this, don't do that, do that, do that. The real teacher is you. If you tell them, don't do this, and you do it, they will listen to you, but in private, they will do exactly what you were doing. So you want to build the reading culture in your family. As Ambassador said, read. You read to children from when they were very young. Then they grow up loving books. And rightly said, my own experience with my mother, I said she was a retired teacher, and I was the last born at home. So she had all the time to teach me and for me to learn from her. So how we raise our children, making sure that we provide a good example to them, that it's important to read is extremely, extremely important. Short of that now, you have our young people reading to pass exams. Nothing puts me off like that. And these are the ones when they write something for you, they come with a good degree, but they write something for you, say, really? Because they read to pass exams. And now with Google, it's easy to pass exam. You know? So they pass exam, but they are not educated. These are two different things. Education is broad. So we have an education system that's geared first from the family, just pass exams, just bring in the grades. You know, how they do it, it doesn't matter. You know, all the way to university. So you read to pass. Instead of reading to know. These are completely two different things.
preempted me.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about that. I studied what they call education foundation. Why do we have education? Is to make people think. Now, from what you are just saying, that our education system does not make people think, rather make people answer questions.
Yeah.
So why do people read? We read because we want to see a perspective and then think further and say, I can develop this idea into something which will give me answers. Our youth today, and the kids today, they want answers in books. When they don't find them, they say this book is useless. And that's where we are, because we say, I want just to go straight and find the answer that I'm looking for. And books do not provide answers. The books make you think in a different perspective. On the same line, books help you to learn the mistakes of others. When you're a leader, you're supposed to go back and say, what does the history say about certain issues? Which decisions were they made at that time, which I cannot make right now because the situation has changed? Or maybe, not about mistakes, what were the right decisions which were made at that time that I can apply today? So it's all about going back and forth, connecting the past, the present, and the future. And that does not provide answers. You don't find correct answers in books, but it makes you process and think further. So we start first from our education system that is, we don't know if we say if it's broken, but we say it has some lot of gaps. A lot of gaps. We say, yeah, it has a lot of gaps, meaning that when you look even the type of questions which are asked by the teachers. I had a friend of mine, the child returned from the US, they come here. The father is very frustrated because his child comes home crying every day. Why? Because the teacher gives some questions. When you read the answers are correct. But the answers are not written exactly the way the teacher taught in class.
Yeah.
The answer is correct, but does not copy word to word of what the teacher said in class. So this boy was frustrated every day crying. So they say, I just take you back to the United States. It's not working here anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem is. What kind of questions do we design? Usually what we are trying to do is to make our education system which asks questions that develop our kids' brains to think more than memorize things. If I have a child looking at a cockroach, and you say you need to name the parts of the cockroach, how does that help? But you say, why do cockroaches like to go into toilets? Or why when you have a difference between differences between what do you call flies, and you have what do you call bees. Bees will go to find flowers to get nectar, but flies want to go to the toilet. Now I have to think, why do bees go to find flowers which smell good, but I have flies which go to toilets in dirty places? So this helps you to develop an idea, why does this happen, instead of saying, I just know the parts of a fly. How does that help you? So I think we need to go back to education system that will make our kids see the value of the books. I just want to share that.
And I think that reminds me of a quote that I recently came across that says, school is not meant to make you educated, rather it's supposed to prepare you for education. And I think it goes back to what you were saying around being able to think. So school is supposed to prepare us, really, and give us the right tools to be able to think for ourselves, to be able to reason. And I think that's needed now more than ever, because the world is becoming increasingly complex. The world is changing at a very rapid pace. Yesterday's thinking will not necessarily help you move tomorrow. So I concur with that. I think
I just want to add to what Kadari said. You quoted Machiavelli. I mean, I don't agree with Machiavelli on a lot of things, but the quote is extremely relevant, because the whole point Now, especially with biographies, autobiographies, you learn what other leaders had to deal with. What, if they are honest, they will tell you what kind of mistakes they made and how they handled them, what they did well, and you can learn from that. So books are like your permanent tutor, mentor. You know, you can test your own ideas against the ideas of others. You know, you listen to other arguments vis-a-vis yours. And don't go for the easy books. You know, there are some people who say, oh, this book is too difficult. So that's precisely why you should read it. I remember even when those days when I was reading a lot of novels, I used to like the John le Carre's novels. And some of them were difficult. And then my friend says, why do you read these books are so difficult? I say, that's precisely the point. So you read to understand from others what they did well, why they did wrong. You don't have to repeat their mistakes, but at least you can have guideposts that can tell you how to do certain things. So for a leader who doesn't want to read, it's quite a big problem. I think they miss and my hope is that leaders themselves will realize that there is value in reading books. And as you were talking, you know, my mind was going back all the years I worked with the presidents and ministers. You know, some they stayed long, others didn't stay long. And I was trying to remember if there is any minister I know who is a good reader of books, who lost his or her job. I cannot think of any. But I know a minister who lost his job. And I will tell you a story. One day we were in Europe. I think actually it was in Paris or somewhere. So we went to the airport, waiting for the flight. And as usual, because President Mkapa, of course, was busy, when he had time, we would go together to a bookshop. So we were at the airport, and I go to the airport bookshop to buy books. There, I had a list of books I was looking for. And then I had the shopping basket was already, I think it had already about over 10 books. And here comes in a minister who was on our delegation and looks at me and said, Ambassador, you are still reading all these books? I say, some of them are mine, some of the president. Why? Oh, don't you read books? He looks at me and said, why should I read books? This is a minister. Huh?
The president heard it himself?
No. The president was in the lounge. I was in the... I was just alone in the bookshop at the airport, and here comes the minister. He looks at me. He walks around, buys a few magazines. I says, good luck. Yeah. But he didn't last long in Not that I said anything, but I'm just telling you, the ministers I knew that liked to read, even their performance was above average. So I hope they will realize that it helps them. It helps them to read. I know once we, at the time when we were on the World Commission on the Social Dimension of Globalization, there was a book we really liked, President Mkapa. And he said, look, buy enough for my cabinet. So I went and bought. So when the cabinet said, okay, everyone go and read this book. I can tell you, maybe only 10% read that book. Because later, you know, you raise up a discussion about an issue that is addressed in the book, which is actually why President Mkapa wanted them to read. And we see the minister is lost. Yeah. So my hope is that they will realize that it's in their interest really to read. And especially if you have presidents who are extremely keen. You want to keep your job, you must prove that you are worth to keep the job. And you can do that by reading a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Sefue, for this opportunity. Mine is not a question, actually. Maybe the only question I have, which came to mind, is that we see this beautiful resource here in Dar es Salaam, but the ministers and the leaders are in Dodoma. Are we having maybe a replicate in Dodoma, or do we expect when they come to Dar es Salaam they read this, or what is happening? That's the only question. Otherwise, I have a few comments. My colleague here talked about the reading corners that we are trying to establish in primary schools. I just wanted to that is really a reading corners, but in secondary schools also we try to provide books for libraries. And I was asking my colleague here right now, do we have even libraries in ministries? Do we? I'm a retired civil servant and I know the answer. So I'm just asking ourselves here. The reading corners, I want to be grateful to, I don't know whether Mr. Bugoya knows that the Mkuki na Nyuta was our partner in establishing the reading corners in the schools. They were, yeah. Yeah, they gave us free books, donations to go and establish those corners, but sadly that project died. No, or rather stalled. It's not in operation anymore. But as I said, I'm a retired civil servant, and I happened to witness most of what Ambassador Sefue was saying here. For me, he was on the part of Mwalimu. Whenever he traveled outside, the only shopping list I saw was books. Yeah. I didn't see any other shopping list for Mwalimu. That's one comment. But also I had a colleague who once told us that if you have issues with a leader and you can't confront them, but unataka kumpa maneno yake, you just write a report of 20 pages, and then from page 15 to maybe page 17, or maybe from page 12 to page 15, 16, weka yale maneno yako unataka kumpatia. Because he will only read the first few pages, and the last few pages. Yeah. That was what was going on in the newspaper. Yeah, so the culture of reading really is lacking, it is systemic. But I want to thank him and Ambassador Sefue and remind him, once we were in Canada with him at a meeting, and he was asked to be the guest of honor. I think he didn't plan to be that. And it was about 3 hours I was given, I think, that I should write a speech for him. As I should draft a speech for him to present the following morning. It was quite a challenge. I didn't sleep. I said, why me? But I tried. And I'm glad he's a great encourager. He told me it was very good. He didn't know that. That I could write such a beautiful speech. And I'm thanking you now again.
Thank you. Let me just add one comment. I don't know do they still have book clubs in secondary schools these days? Yeah, because that's where I read a lot of books, because in especially O level, I was very active in our book club, and we would compete how many books you can read in a week. And not just say I read, but you have to give a summary to your colleagues. So that really helps to build the culture. Yeah, but in New York, there was an ambassador there at the United Nations. He was from an Asian country, I won't mention it. And he was very harsh he had a very good counselor, he was a counselor, a very good writer. Developing arguments for whatever you want to. So, but this guy was very good. So good that the ambassador didn't even bother to read the drafts before. So he would just pick it and go to the General Assembly and read it. But he was mistreating this young man. So the tour of this young man came to an end, and he was going back home. So he packed all his belongings, they left, he shipped the family, and he remained alone in New York. And the day he was leaving, he wrote a speech for the ambassador. The first page, excellent. So the ambassador is on the rostrum, is talking, you know, it's the president of the General Assembly, blah, 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 blah. Applause. And then it turns to the second page, big letters, continue on your own, you fool. So he quickly thought, he said, Mr. President of the General Assembly, I don't feel quite well. Can I continue with my speech tomorrow? And then left there, I said, goes on the call and said, where is this fool? I said, oh, he's already on board. But this just, it's a story, you will find it at the UN in New York, but it emphasizes the point that if you are a leader, you have to read. You have to read. You cannot just depend on your speech.
Your Excellency, I wish also to thank you for this topical issue you have introduced today, and thank you very much for your introductory remarks. First of all, I wish to suggest that the center here procure one book by Mr. Robert Johansson, The Leaders Make the Future. This book is very important because it's like really answering or addressing what we are discussing today. Because there, introductory, he's telling us that the world today is volatile, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and agility. Now, in these four characterized phenomenon, you find that there are so many challenges, dilemmas, which leaders have to make solutions. Now, without reading, really, you can't find proper solutions, whether it's a dilemma or a problem to solve. So one bottom line I want to underscore is a reading culture develops skills to develop, to argument or to lead. In actual fact, we can say leadership is readership. If we can say so, then we'll make some steps. The other aspect I wish to also to inspire my young people here, if you are assigned to assist a boss, really it is your duty to ensure that you provide him with the essential information, essential knowledge, so that he can make a decision. I wish to share my experience, a little experience. I worked with the military defense forces for 39 years. Out of 39 years, I think 22, I was working with headquarters. Now you can imagine the pressure which was coming from the command. Since my young age, you are told that write about something. Now, if you don't know about that something, it is very difficult to develop something without reading. So it was, I can say, it helped me a lot, because it was there when I developed arguments, and when I presented to my seniors, they were kind of corrected, like the ambassador said, but eventually they brought me to a good level. So I encourage our young people here to develop that culture of reading so that they can have more skills. Thank you.
Maybe just to start with, to point out is, I think there's also a lack of ourselves also to write on issues that relate to us per se. We have so many theories that are from the West, and they sometimes do not really apply to us. And we read them and then we try to apply them, but actually they don't really work for ourselves. So it's about doing research and doing writing on what worked, so that people can also read about it and also use that example to succeed.
I want to challenge some of the narratives that have been raised so far. Please indulge me. So I think youth these days is, I often see it raised by a lot of our parents and our grandparents. But I think it's very important to remember that we are the product of you guys, right? So if we don't read, it's, you know, to a large extent, if people follow examples, we are not seeing enough examples. Mzee Goya, you talk about history being a challenge in this country, the young people's understanding of history. Maybe I should talk about Mkuki. Where's Mkuki? He's more like my age. But one of the tragedies I personally feel in this country is that Mwalimu Nyerere did not write his own biography. Maybe for humility, or he just didn't want to sort of toot his own horns, but we don't see enough of the generation that wishes us to be readers and more intellectual. We don't see enough of you producing the kind of interesting material that makes reading compelling. Because it's one thing to say read, but it's another thing to make reading cool and interesting and fascinating, whether that's shows, TVs, quiz shows. If you go to Britain today, on almost every evening, there's a quiz show, there's a history documentary, there's an interview that is actually fascinating. It's not difficult to watch. And I don't think we are producing enough interesting material to wake up that appetite for learning and inquisitiveness in our young people. So a challenge for me is tukubaliane hapa balozi. Kwanza wewe lini unachapisha biography? Na balozi maja. Na wengine wote help us create very interesting material that we can actually relate to, because it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 interesting books, then you have a culture, then you have a habit, then it goes. So I think that for me is number one. And then number two is a question around, I know you're not going to point one specific book, but what would you say are the foundation kind of reading materials that you think any leader, forget the general population, any leader should engage with? Those sort of principal foundational readings that you know can kickstart a reading journey to anyone who wishes to read. So I would wish that you address those 2 points. Asante sana.
Let us finish first the day after tomorrow we are launching the Kiswahili version of President Mkapa's autobiography, because he wrote it in English, but he said, before he died, he said, no, you know, we should now translate it. It didn't happen when he was alive, but at least we have completed it as the UONGOZI Institute, and it's going to be, and it's very good Kiswahili, by the way. Well, you will see those who would like to, if you have the English version and you read the Kiswahili version, you will see that it's not word for word, which is exactly what I was talking about. It's Mkapa thinking in Kiswahili, not somebody translating what he wrote in English into, yeah. So that's the kind of things we like. So but writing assumes people will going to buy. And tomorrow, my brother Goya will tell you. So because writing is costly, I mean, if I look at our budget to produce these books, I mean, as an individual, I cannot afford it. Yeah. But if there are enough people who read books, it's easy even to have financing for that, because people know that this book will sell, money will come back. So these are two sides of a coin. We have to address. You're absolutely right, and we also talk here with Walter. Our people should write more, but ultimately, the books have to balance. Yeah. So.
Asante.
We'll go this side, yeah.
Actually, I had wanted to piggyback on what Balozi Mahaja had said. I'm also an educator, and I had an opportunity to teach in a country that is outside of Tanzania. And this is my own journey. I'm trying to remember my own journey. As a young kid, I hated to read. When I went out of Tanzania, I hated to read. And I'm trying to remember what made me like to read. So we talked about culture. I feel like we have to capitalize on the reading culture. Like, it has to be embedded into the curriculum, because when I went to this country, one of the things that we had to do as a teacher, the first 15 minutes when your students come in, they have something called DEAR time. So you drop everything and read, DEAR. And they sit down quietly and they read whatever they wanted to read. They don't teach you, or they don't ask you to read specifically. Whatever you bring, you read. If you don't have anything to read, we'd have a little library where you'd pick something from there. So that automatically made my students want to read. And then as a teacher, I also had to read because I had to model. And now I realized that, I'm reading, Now I started remembering what happened. What was the gap? Like, how come I didn't read when I was younger? Could be so many reasons. I don't want to pinpoint, but maybe we didn't have the resources at the schools that I went to. I went to school here in Tanzania, Wereru, Arusha School. At Arusha School, I remember we did have a library. I don't remember much about that, but at Wereru, I remember they used to tell us to speak in English. I remember us given books. So I'm suspecting maybe resources was the problem there. But one thing I can think about is maybe inside the curriculum, if we can embed reading time, like make it a point where kids are supposed to read while in school, with the great idea of what was said about the children's corner, reading's corner. I think that would make a very good input. And then, so allotting specific reading time. And then I also think as an educator, if we capitalize on early childhood learning, like if we induce that in our children, I think that will create a reading habit from when they're younger. Because it's very hard to change somebody's behavior when they're old. Yeah. I mean, right now, nikwambie kunywa hii soda, upendi kunywa soda. Are you gonna drink it? No. You'll probably make me happy to take a sip, but that's not what you're gonna do. So I think in the future, this is something that we can have a dialogue of, harness the reading culture, and I'll give a very small example. I have my 5-year-old. He goes to a school where they give a child every night, every Monday through Friday, they bring him back with a folder with a reading book. So he reads a book every single day. And that day, if I'm late at home to read for him, mama yangu, nitamjua, yani nitamweleza kwa nini nimechelewa hatujasoma kitabu. Kwa hiyo, that is a very good discipline. If we can try and have that dialogue, I think we can accomplish something as a nation, and hopefully leaders wetu na watu wengine wote in general. Asante.
So, I think there's a gentleman who's been trying to ask a question. I think you can ask, and then we'll come back to this corner. I know there's a gentleman at the back on this side as well.
Thank you very much. I'm Thomas Akonai David Makwai. Ambassador Sefue, thank you very much for your service to our country. Your story inspires us, and it sparks our imaginations when it comes to art of reading and writing. And as you rightly put, that writing and reading goes together. And as Ambassador Mahaja said it rightly, that reading improves one's capacity to argue. And if I can add on, reading perfects writing. Now, if you look at the bookshelves right here, and if you go downtown in Dar es Salaam and you get in one of the bookshops, you can hardly see books written by Tanzanians. Now, my question is, does it mean that the reading and writing have been displaced apart when it comes to to the generations of today who read books. But two, what went wrong? You guys, the senior citizens like you, Mzee Ugoya and you, even when when you converse to us, when you speak, you speak eloquently. But for us, we stutter. What went wrong? And even when it comes to writing, what happened? If you go to way back in the 1970s, what went wrong? What happened? Where did it get lost? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
I think I'll just make one or two quick comments. I'm certainly concerned about the lack of confidence that I see in quite a number of young people. You know, if you go outside the country, you know, she just mentioned, I think, the US. You go to a primary school, listen to the kids. They speak with confidence. They are not afraid. Our children is like they are raised that you are a child, you don't speak in front of adults. And that's very harmful. That's very, very harmful. Now, don't ask me how my own children, I raised them. I tried as much as I can, but it's too late for me. But for you young people, it's extremely important for your children to have confidence, that they can argue with you, because that's how you build your... So if he or she thinks, Dad, you are wrong, he says, I think, Dad, you are wrong because of 1, 2, 3. So, where nitakuchapa, una adabu. You kill it. So you ask that question, it's extremely important how raise children to enable them to think. You know, children know more than we think they do. They know a lot. But you don't know how much they know because you don't let them talk. And sometimes they can't ask you questions, they would rather ask a friend in school. You know, so I think that also can help. You know, I don't know what else I can say.
I think Mr. Walter had something to add to that.
Please pardon me because I think these fundamental basics.
It's on.
For some reason, we don't like to face. The truth of the matter is that our intellectuals from our universities have no confidence to write in English. And they're right.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they can't write in English.
Yeah.
So the only thing they go to do is that they use the textbooks that they learned from America, if they had a scholarship, they are the same textbooks they're going to come and impose on their own students. We did 3 books by Professor Nkoma, big tomes on top level of science. And we went to a conference in Nairobi. And when we showed these books, oh, come on, in Tanzania? You mean that this is, you published these books?
Yeah.
Yes. And so the question is, if you constantly see European names on textbooks and hardly ever African names, then obviously the assumption is that the European names create and you consume. And this is so ingrained that it's a real struggle.
Yeah.
Now, and again, you have all this question comes up. Kwa nini viongozi wetu wanaandika katika Kiingereza, kwa nini, etc., etc. But people forget your viongozi learned in English, studied in English. So Professor Isa Shivji speaks very good Kiswahili, but he really is more comfortable writing in English because he studied, learned in English and mastered it. So now the problem is, for instance, translations, because we tell our people that they have learned in English and that they can read English. And trust me, most of them cannot. But when you bring them a book in Swahili, they say, I read it in English. Or people say, I can't read Swahili. But they actually can't read English, they can't read Swahili either. So there is the crisis. And I think there was President Mkapa started, the civil service reform thing. And I think one of the things that were supposed to be done, that all these people going for jobs were going to be going through the process of applications, interviews, and so on. That a permanent secretary was not just going to be appointed permanent secretary. They would do, if necessary, an exam and an interview and so on. And that process could probably weed a lot of the people who don't read, or at least people who prepare for the examinations. And maybe these kind of radical steps might help, but the fundamentals are still the same. Give the children books. And really, I would almost say, just flood the country with books, and the children will know how to deal with those books. Don't try, of course. I mean, the Cubans or the Chinese or the Russians, they do a book and do 10 million copies of those books. So that every Russian child has that book. Every Chinese child has read that book. This way you begin to have a narrative of a nation reading a book, and everybody can respond to that. So you're creating not only reading culture, but you're bringing a consciousness of a nation as an entity that's moving together. So I would still say, never mind, just get the books out there, which means spend money on books in the further analysis.
Yeah.
Which will make me
excellent.
And I think that is a very good way of sort of like capturing the discussion we've been having, and I would encourage and challenge every single one of us, even after we're done with this, connecting and talking and meeting people, let's move further, than just discussing and raising all these issues that we've said, but what are you personally going to do to actually be part of the solution? I mean, clearly we have a very clear understanding of what the issues are, and all of us sit at different positions, in influence, and I think every single one of us has something that they can do. Thankfully, there are stakeholders in the room, so I think the conversation after this really, even from a thought level maybe, has to begin. What are you going to personally do to make sure that we are building a nation of people who are passionate readers, people who have the curiosity for reading? And I know UONGOZI's active step is really having the resource center here, and having a resource center in Dodoma as well, but also having these spaces where we can have these conversations. Tomorrow there's a conversation around publishing, and I think the day after that there's a conversation around the launch of the late president's book, the Swahili version of it, right? So, but what are you personally going to do to make sure that you are part of the solution as we're talking about all of this? Now, unfortunately, because of time, we don't have space for more questions. But there's a question that I would like to ask Ambassador here as we close, and then we would welcome Mr. Singo for closing remarks. This is a question that I have developed a habit of asking a lot of leaders that I have conversations with. And I know you've said a number of times here that you don't want to zero in on one book that you've read. But the question is 1-1-1-1. And what is the one book that you've read in your life that you say, I wish I'd come across this book earlier in my journey, whether in my personal life or in my leadership? And then what is the one habit that you developed at some point in your life that you're like, if I had developed this habit sooner, I probably would have been at a different place in my life? And what is the one value that you will not compromise no matter the cost? So what is the one book? If you could be so gracious as to give us one book. And what is the one habit? And removing reading, of course, because I think, as you so clearly said, that you started this quite early in your life by the nurturing of your mother. And what is the one value that you will not compromise, no matter what it costs you?
Yeah. With the book, I don't think I can mention a single book. I can only tell you the kind of books I like to read, as I told you. I like history books, especially about Africa. I just gave you the example of the books on the Congo. You know, King Leopold's Ghost, The Heart of Darkness, CIA, Chief Station Congo, how they killed Lumumba, you know, because these are parts of African history a lot of young people don't know. For instance, how many people in Tanzania know about the Battle of Quito Cuanavale? How many know that? The Battle of Quito Cuanavale in Angola. And if it were not for that battle, maybe apartheid South Africa would still be here. So it's, you know, it's it was a phenomenal turning point in African history. And Africans, they don't know about it. You know, I was telling you that I was as ambassador in Cuba. You know, several times I went there to their museums to see all their soldiers who died in Angola. And I can understand their frustration that Africans, including Angolans, I met Angolans who have only a distant recollection that, oh, there was. It's a big mistake. So history gives you a sense of where we came from. It gives you explanation of what is happening today. So I think those books are extremely, extremely important. I said autobiographies, especially because you learn the good things that others did. You learn the mistakes, if they are good autobiographies. Like the two that UONGOZI Institute has worked on, both of them, you read both of them, they are honest. The things that they think they did well, they say, I think we did this well. The thing they think they didn't do so well, they are open about it. You read Mwinyi's book, you read Mkapa's book, it's a balanced book. So books like those, they help you, you know, to know what could go wrong and how it can be fixed. You don't have to repeat mistakes that others have made. But I also like literary books. You know, I mean, even novels, you know, they help you. You know, these days there is a lot of talk about emotional intelligence. But you know, you can learn a lot of emotional intelligence by reading fiction. Yeah. A lot of it, you know. So I won't focus on one book, but I say, you know, if you read a cross-section of books like those, they really prepare you well for leadership or whatever you want to do. Yeah.
And the one habit?
The one habit, now, I don't know if it's a good habit or not, but perfectionism. You know, if I read a sentence and there's a grammatical error, I may not even sleep. There's something wrong in this sentence. So I want everything, for instance, I do, you know, it's perfectionism. So it's a habit I have. I'm not sure if it's a very helpful habit, but I like it. I like it when I see it, it's nice and done. It's good. Maybe that's what kept me as a speechwriter for so long.
And the personal value?
Values integrity. Integrity, because I am who I am. If people have doubts about my integrity, then who am I? So to me, integrity is extremely important. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I think
Thank you.
integrity.
Thank you.
Wow. And I think all of this really ties it in, right? Integrity. Integrity is certainly, it's the one value I think all leaders ought to have.
Yeah.
Because everything really hinges. I think even when it comes to reading, reading is something that no one is going to watch, no one is going to come and you know, supervise whether or not you read. But if you've made a commitment and you follow through on commitment, it is a form of integrity as well, where, you know, I have committed to grow and develop, and I will actually take active steps to do it.
Integrity, I say, it's a very broad subject. Some people think of integrity only in terms of, oh, I'm not corrupt, but integrity is a lot of things. I tell you, I'll come tomorrow, I come tomorrow. It's integrity also.
So we have come to the end of this part of the evening, the conversation. Ambassador, thank you so much for making the time to actually have this conversation and creating a space where we can dialogue around reading culture and leadership broadly. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Singo to give a few remarks, and then after that, we'll go to the networking session.
Yeah, maybe I just want to first to thank Ambassador Sefue for taking time to join us this evening, and our host, and I see Balozi Maja. Thank you very much. It's been a while we met, but Irene also. We thank you, Balozi Mumwi. I think you've been to Russia somehow. Yes. So, a friend back there. Okay, very good. So we have more than 50,000 publications. When you look at this, it looks small, but when you go online now, you get even more publications. We are collaborating with Harvard Business Review. We have a lot of publications. You can ask, if you're a member, you can ask our librarian to just download just almost anything that you need. So if you're not a member and you're here, please make sure before you leave today, you do that. As I said before, we have two centers, Dar es Salaam, here, 3rd floor at JNICC, 8th floor at PSSF Tower, Kambarage Tower in Dodoma. You can borrow a book here, return it in Dodoma, borrow a book in Dodoma, return it here, and if you're a member. This is a full event, just because I'm just getting the numbers. We've been 85 online, and then about 30 plus here. So it's about 100 plus. This is a full event. So we are real thankful for that. Our library has a lot of leaders. We have been encouraging them. We are very happy that we have a lot of ministers now who are borrowing books from us, who are members. We have PSs. We have some of them are ambassadors overseas. So we have even some of the members who are overseas. We have about 600 active members in our library. That's a good number, I think. And we'll keep encouraging. We wish at some point to have some simpler books so that we can help for the younger generation. In the future, maybe we'll have the books that are simpler for the emerging leaders to read, which they can connect, because we have to build them from the bottom as we go. After saying this, we are trying very hard. We want to make sure that our leaders become very good in organizational leadership, very good in people leadership, which is the most difficult. People leadership is the hardest. And then the last one, on personal level, personal leadership. When you walk, you look like a leader. When you talk like a leader. Just you, as a leader, build yourself. So we welcome you again. Mzee Bugoya, we thank you very much for the very good work that you did. You are a quality person.
Maybe you can mention that we are trying to find a ways of having regular
meetings like this.
You know, book discussions. Yes. You know, Mr. Bugoya writes a book, we come here, we meet. You know,
very good. Very good. We have a book club, I think.
As part of efforts to encourage people to...
Very good, Ambassador, for reminding me that we have a book club. That meets here, I think, every 2 months or a month. They meet here on Saturdays, I think. And that book club has been discussing very nice topics. So they pick one book, go through it and present and discuss. So you can join the book club. It's just in the same place here, just like this setting. So join us as we're trying to build the culture of reading. But writing is not easy, because writing requires a lot of research. So some people write a book and come to us and say, I want to publish my book through UONGOZI. How much research have you done? Not from your head, you have to do a lot of research. So we encourage people to write also. If you have a good idea, just join the efforts. After saying this, I thank also the UONGOZI staff who have organized this, and a lot of ideas to make this happen. Karibuni sana, asanteni sana.